And welcome on in to Dynasty Never Rest, a podcast focused on Dynasty fantasy football, trades, and awesome guest stars. This is our second show, and I'm excited to introduce our next incredible guest, Nick Skrip, or how many of you may know him as P2W Fantasy. Welcome, Nick.
What is up? What is up? Really appreciate you having me on here. I feel like we have a good relationship through the Twitter space, and I host my own show, so I'm always happy to not have to prepare a show and just on another one. So I do appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited about today.
Yeah, we're definitely excited to get down talking a little free agency because it's been pretty wild out there the past 4 days. You know, Davante Adams an hour ago got traded to be a Raider. I'm not mad about it as we're both resident Chicago Bears fans, and so to make Darnell Mooney the third best wide receiver in the division, I don't hate that.
No, it's not a bad thing at all. I feel like for once in my life, I can like actually root for Davante Adams, who I've respected immensely throughout his career, but it's just so hard to root for a Packers player. So I'm kind of happy he is no longer green and yellow.
Yeah, my dad, he's a diehard Bears fan, and he will not own any Packers on any of his fantasy teams.
Oh, there you go. That says a lot right there. I'm a huge jersey guy. I have over 100 basketball, football, soccer, whatever jerseys. And I would have loved to have a Davante Adams jersey. I couldn't buy his Packers one.
But now you have the opportunity.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so let's get into it. And let's talk about some free agency, but let's focus it in on the Bears first, just because we have common ground there, and it's going to be really easy to talk about. So, first of all, who have the Bears picked up that you have really liked the acquisition in free agency?
You know, the first three moves that they made, I liked. You know, at first I didn't know much about, and I'll butcher his name, but the defensive tackle Larry
Ogunjobi.
Yeah, I didn't know too much about him in all honesty, but then I saw that he just had his career year in sacks, and he also looks like an absolute monster. And it's a position we need. We need more guys rushing the passers for the other team, especially with Matt Gone, who is defensive end. This guy's a defensive tackle. Still, you need guys. Lucas Patrick from the Green Bay Packers. I like the fact that he has some versatility. He can play guard. He can play center, and we need that. We need more guys protecting Justin Fields. That was my main two things. I said we need offensive line, and then we need receivers. And then the last guy, Nicholas Morrow from the Raiders. I play IDP, so I actually paid attention to this guy before, and he profiles as a very athletic linebacker, which I think next to Roquan on one of the sides, Smith, is going to be awesome. I actually really like that move for the linebacker position. I was a fan of his. He just wasn't super healthy this past season. Now, the two wide receiver additions, not super sexy, not really into either one of those. I'm not sure about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, they're both bench guys to me. Like, they don't deserve to be in a starting lineup. They're just depth pieces to me. I'm hoping that the Bears still go target a big guy in free agency like Juju to kind of cover our bases, have a good vet wide receiver, and then go after somebody in the draft. Now let's move off the Bears a little. Who do you think has been the best or most surprising free agent acquisition thus far?
That is a big question in itself right there. I mean, the Adams one that just happened, I think, surprised all of us just because Aaron Rodgers came back to Green Bay. We didn't know if he was going to retire. He had ties to, the Broncos potentially. I think the fact that we knew Rodgers was coming back, we thought it was a lock that Adams and him would give it one more chance. And the fact that he is going to the Raiders with Derek Carr, I thought that was one of the most surprising things. Obviously, we've had a bunch of other moves throughout the league that, it trickles down to fantasy. implications. Obviously, Russell Wilson to the Broncos, that was huge. Hopefully that gives some of those guys a boost. So I think Adams, I know it's like recency bias, but I thought that was very surprising because, even if we look at Russell Wilson, we kind of knew that there was a chance he would leave. And we kind of knew that the Broncos would get a new quarterback. And we can go down the list of, where guys landed. We could talk about the Jaguars, signing 65 slot receivers. But I think Adams was just surprising because nobody thought he was going to leave,
Yeah, I definitely, when that came through on the wire tonight, I was like, oh my gosh, how mad is Aaron Rodgers right now? Because he just inked his contract and then they send away. Allen Lazard is his number one receiving option right now, and that just gives me so much joy.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, Lazard's had some decent games throughout his career, but you have to think that the Packers have to have a bigger plan because I don't think that today they just found out Devontae Adams is not coming back. I feel like they've kind of had to know that this writing was on the wall.
Well, I think that I think they probably had it in place and they wanted to get Rodgers signed and in-house before they pulled the trigger on the move because like 15 minutes after the trade was solidified, Adams already had a contract extension. So it feels like this was premeditated, like they already knew something that was going to happen. And one of my favorite signings was the Miles Jack signing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that they needed a middle linebacker, and while he's no Bobby Wagner, he's pretty good at what he does, and they didn't have to spend a ton of money on him. And so I think he was just an absolutely needed signing for the Steelers. He'll fit into that system really well. And, he wasn't a bank buster. So I just thought that was a nice signing for them.
I agree to that because this past season, for some reason, it just became known that running backs were going to tear up the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is like a weird thing to think about. Devin Bush looked pretty bad at times too for most of the season, I'd say. And there was even a time, weekly start and sits. I called for Deonta Foreman to be a major start, and he tore the Steelers up. I mean, it was interesting to see them because we all think about the Steelers as a great defense, and they looked terrible on defense this year. So that was a great signing. I like that call a lot.
All right. Who was your least favorite free agent acquisition out of the whole pool of free agent acquisitions? Whether you just don't feel like the player's quality or whether the contract details are pretty muddy.
I'm gonna reach on this one. I feel like a little bit just because I had this bias for this player because I've been a big believer in him before, but I'm not going to say I hate it the most because there's so many weird ones, with guys ending up in the same spot and things. But I don't know if I really like the Russell Gage one, and a lot of people see that the opportunity is there for Russell Gage, and Chris Godwin might not be back for the first couple of weeks, so you look at that and you say, hey, if he's the wide receiver 2 for Tom Brady, his value actually might be pretty good. But most of my offseason stuff's been dynasty, right? And I'm looking at this team, and there were so many other places that I felt that Russell Gage, who I think has earned himself a role somewhere the last 2 seasons, and he's got all these opportunities because guys were hurt. Julio Jones 2 years ago was hurt. Calvin Ridley was hurt a little bit that same year, and also this year he had the mental health absence. But I wanted Russell Gage to go somewhere where I thought he had a solidified role, and I looked at different numbers and I broke it down, and I don't want to bore anybody with that, but I'm looking at a world where Chris Godwin's sometime healthy, Mike Evans is healthy, maybe Gronk is back, maybe Fournette is back and he catches passes, and I'm like, where does Russell Gage fit in? So I think it was just like a deeper league call that I was like, go get Russell Gage, and then I don't know. What's your thoughts about that whole?
Yeah, there's a point in time where they're going to bring in a pass catching running back because Fournette was used in that role so much, and I wouldn't be shocked if Fournette finds his way back, but I think that Gronk will sign again, and so when everybody's healthy, Russell Gage is the 5th option in that offense.
Yeah,
and that for fantasy purposes just doesn't inspire me. Antonio Brown is a different athlete. He's on the same tier as Gronk and Evans and Godwin. But when you compare him to Russell Gage, yeah, Russell Gage has been fine because of opportunity, but he's not going to have that much opportunity when everybody's on the field. So, yeah, a $30 million contract for him being the third wide receiver on the team. It's definitely not exciting for Russell Gage owners.
Yeah, and I looked just briefly here at wrapping that up. I looked at all the weeks that Antonio Brown played with both, actually all three of Mike Evans, Godwin, and Gronk, and it was just so unpredictable what targets were going to look like. There was a week where he had 7 targets and a touchdown, huge fantasy week. There was another week where he had 5 targets and 3 targets, and it was just when I pick out guys for fantasy personally, I want solidified targets for my wide receivers. I don't want to have to juggle and say this guy might get 8 targets, but he also might get 2. So that was kind of my turnoff, I guess.
Absolutely. I guess my least favorite signing, I think me and Jake went over this on Tuesday, and I said that Christian Kirk had been my least favorite signing just due to the numbers. He hasn't ever supported 1,000-yard season, and he's the third highest paid wide receiver. Well, fourth now due to Adams' new contract. But I think Will Dissly, that signing is probably my least favorite. I mean, you paid the guy $8 million per year on a 3-year contract, and the guy hasn't crossed the threshold of 300 yards.
Yeah.
I understand he's a good blocker, but if he would have hit the free agent market, I'm guessing the max he would have gotten paid per year there is $4 to $5 million. And so I'm thinking that they just grossly overspent, and they have a stud tight end in Noah Fant. And so I know Noah Fant's not a spectacular blocker, but it was just confusing on kind of all fronts there for me. What did you think?
With Will Dissly, I've never been a big fan. He's missed tons of games throughout his career. He's been a guy that didn't even start a lot at times in 2020. I'm with you though. What exactly are you paying for from him? If you're paying for a guy just to be out there and block, I think you can probably find cheaper options that focus solely on that. And if they already have another guy in the system, I don't see them like running all these sets that are always going to have 2 tight ends out there, and one's always going to block and the other one's going to run 1,000 routes. So
right.
I do get that. I think that makes sense. People spend weird money sometimes, and I feel like every now and then you look at some of the deals that are made and you wonder if they like jumped the gun, like they were nervous they were going to miss out on Will Dissly's pass blocking, so they just threw the money, things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the draft. And who are you? If you could pick one person for the Bears to draft, who would be your primary target?
So the Bears, the luxury for them, they got 2 second-round picks, right? They have a 3rd round as well. So, I mean, we can go down the list and say, oh, well, they have a 4th round too. But I feel like those 3 picks, they can make some necessary moves. And I think that they need a cornerback with a C. And I think that they also can continue to improve the O-line. But seeing as though we just signed Amon-Ra St. Brown's older brother that really is like his little brother because he's not as good and even close to as good. And then Byron Pringle, who like sometimes was better than Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson, but sometimes was behind those guys. We need a receiver. And, I tweeted out earlier, and I think you chimed into it. I was like, man, we can really use Juju, and George Pickens was my guy because I feel like George Pickens was very high on a lot of scouts' lists before he was banged up in college and had the ACL injury. Him climbing back into health and being productive, I think that says a lot about his work rate, his work ethic. But looking at the guy, 6'3", 195 pounds, very athletic, contested catches, good hands, out of Georgia. He's played against good competition. I think George Pickens, if he falls, in the draft to where the Bears can take him, it would be a smash grab, because I think we really need somebody that can complement Darnell Mooney, right? Darnell Mooney's this big deep threat guy who's explosive with the ball in his hands and things like that, and having a athletic guy who can go up and grab balls and be physical like George Pickens makes sense to me. I mean, we can go down the list to the other guys that might be available in that range: Sky Moore, Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson. There's a bunch of other guys, but I like George Pickens.
Yeah, so if you would have been listening to the show last week, Jake's a Bears fan as well.
Okay.
And so we talked about Bears a little, and I asked him a similar question. And he said he wanted Juju in free agency. And then I said that I wanted George Pickens as
almost like I put it together, man.
As the draft pick. So when you posted that today, I was like, oh man, he's on the same wavelength here.
There we go.
Yeah, so there's a lot of options, but I do think that the corner is super important for the Bears. It's maybe less important now that Devontae Adams is gone, but we still Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. We don't have a second guy, and so I talked about Bryce Callahan last night and saying that I would want him back in the system, and I'm really familiar with the day one corners, but not so familiar with the day two corners. So I'm hoping one of those day one guys falls and we can snag him in the second round, as well as George Pickens, and help Justin Fields, but also get that second cornerback slot.
Yeah, nine picks away for the two, unless I wrote it down wrong, the 2 second-round picks are 39th and 48th. So, I mean, if they're eyeing two guys and, it falls in their favor, they can probably make some decent moves there. If they take 1 and 1, they take the best receiver available and the best cornerback available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And, yeah, we also talked about just a pass rusher because we lost Goldman, Hicks, and Mack this offseason. And so just restoring that O-line with Robert Quinn being 31 years old.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have a young guy in there. So we'll just kind of have to see. I'm getting excited for the draft, but there's still a lot of good prospects in free agency out there. Bobby Wagner, Teron Armstead, Juju. Some of these guys I expected to be off the board, and they're just sitting there. So we'll just kind of have to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. When guys get cut, sometimes too, I see all like the Bears people chiming in, like polls, like now's your chance. And some guy actually had like a picture of him with these like laser beam eyes. So people are fully into him making a move. It seems quiet at times, but I don't know. I guess the 3 moves we talked about earlier, we got to be happy about that personally. But
yeah, when I saw J.C. Treader get cut by the Browns, I was like, oh man, if Poles could pull him, I would be ecstatic. Yeah. All right. So let us move on to our sleepers. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask you to define what a sleeper is, so that if part of our audience doesn't know what a sleeper is, and also I feel like it's a little volatile within the community, the definition of what a sleeper is. Some people are like, if they're in the top 200 players drafted, they're not a sleeper. And so I want you to kind of give how you round out the definition of a sleeper.
Sure. So this week I released an article about QB upside, and I defined what I thought upside meant, because just like you said, a lot of these fantasy terms are different person to person. I feel like there's no true definition to a lot of these terms. Your definition of sleeper is probably different than my definition of sleeper. Some people think that a sleeper is like a free player that's rostered in under 30% of leagues, that is a deep league guy and is outside of the top, like you said, 200 players. I keep it simple. I feel like a sleeper is a guy whose cost now is much less than their value later. So, for instance, let's say you said, Patterson from the Falcons this past season was a sleeper before the season. He wasn't being drafted very high, right? His cost was very, very small if you wanted to trade for him, but his value later was much higher than his cost originally. So that's kind of how I look at it is, again, cost now versus production later. So that's my definition of a sleeper, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. And when you go by the other definition of, somebody not in the top 200 players, it's really, you're just picking at players that, have a small chance of hitting, small chance of changing their value. And so this kind of allows us to go into most tiers of players and kind of address them. And so I definitely like this definition much better than some of the other definitions. So we're going to try to hit a little on each position. So we're going to do one QB, couple running backs, couple wide receivers, couple tight ends. And actually, I filled this out before free agency. And so I am going to have to change my tight ends on the fly here because I don't think they're sleepers anymore.
Things change fast. Things change fast in a dynasty.
Absolutely.
That's why I say a little like off topic, but I always say like, which I'm sure other people say too, but timing is key, right? Especially with free agency. So I was like pushing, if you're interested in player X, Y, and Z, make the move before they find a new home in dynasty, because once they do, their price goes up, because all of our eyes are on that sleeper notification saying, Zach just got picked up by the Packers, your team.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So why don't you start us off with who you have as your QB sleeper?
So, I all off season I've been talking about Justin Fields, so I'm not going to be a Bears homer and say anything about Justin Fields, but I still think he's like my number one dynasty buy. I had a whole board session about it and everything. I'm gonna go with Tua, because I feel like Tua is very polarizing for people. I think a lot of people are either kind of in, kind of out, really out, kind of in. It's not a consensus for Tua. And recently I saw a report that said the offensive coordinator said that they want to build the system and have it tailored for Tua. And also their new head coach signing is excited about Tua. So knowing that the coaching staff is buying into Tua, and Flores, I don't think before really was, especially with the reports that came out, that's a good sign. I was impressed this season with his completion percentage in 6 of his 11 games played. He had 70+% for his completion percentage. So he was efficient. And we saw a glimpse of some upside week 6 and 7. He had over 20 fantasy points. What we do know, Jalen Waddle and him, good connection. Jalen Waddle was awesome this year. And I think that year 2 of Waddle we'll see a lot. Mike Gesicki is back. Mike Gesicki and Tua had good glimpses of a connection that meant well for fantasy. The only thing, I talk about upside all the time. We got to see some sort of consistent upside. The completion percentage could be there. The connection for his weapons can be there. I just want to see more consistent upside, because we know he's not going to run the ball like Jalen Hurts, right? But he's also probably not going to throw the ball like Patrick Mahomes has the ceiling of a 3-touchdown day at any rate. But I think with Tua's price right now versus what he could be, especially if this system continues to build, are two different things. So I'm going to go on a limb and say Tua.
Yeah, I really like that they brought in an offensive-minded head coach that's going to just be great for a third-year quarterback who his rookie year was still kind of dealing with that phantom injury. And so last year was really the first year we saw him comfortable. And so just getting a new system in which I think it'll just be a sharper offense. It'll just be a better offense, an offense that's better suited to Tua. And so I think he will definitely rise in value. And I would love to see them add another receiving option. I know they added Cedric Wilson not super exciting to me. So if they grab a receiver in the first 3 rounds, I would love to see that for Tua's stock. But ultimately, I think he will improve on this year.
Yeah, they do need another option. One other plus that will help him is they brought in a better Myles Gaskin and Chase Edmonds. So I know that doesn't mean he's going to throw the ball 60 yards at Chase Edmonds, but having a guy in the system that profiles as a pass catching back can help to a degree. But I agree with you about bringing in somebody else.
Absolutely. So my sleeper QB here is Jameis Winston. I feel like Jameis Winston is going to be the fill-in for whoever doesn't get Deshaun Watson. Because I think right now all those teams are just hoping that they get Watson, and then if they don't, Jameis is this consolation prize. But I think that Jameis showed a lot of promise in the offense, even though Sean Payton didn't show a lot of trust in him and letting him do what he does, air out the ball. And part of that, I think, was due to his wide receivers. When you have Deontay Harris and Josh Johnson and Marquez Callaway, it's not a great receiving core. And so you don't want to throw the ball a whole ton when you can't rely on anybody catching the ball. And so if he finds his way to Carolina, or Michael Thomas stays put and is healthy at the Saints, I just think he'll definitely have an uptick in value. He is the 30th QB off the board in Superflex. And I think that he just has QB1 upside. We've seen it before. Mind you, that was with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But he has shown us that QB1 ceiling that he has. And so just maybe being with the Saints in the second year, or just getting some better weapons, will just elevate his game and take him up from being the 30th QB off the board. I think that's a really good value for him right now.
I agree. I like Jameis Winston a lot in Superflex leagues. I think, again, right now, if you're listening to the show, or you listen to it, in the morning or something like that, he hasn't been signed yet. So if you're looking for a quarterback, this might be the cheapest you're going to get him in a while, because if he does go to the Colts, or is solidified with the Saints, it's different than him just floating around. And you mentioned the big season with the Buccaneers. It was his historic 33 touchdown, 30 interception season. Yeah. He was the QB4 that season. And you know what's scary? Interceptions subtract points for the most part. So let's say he only threw 15 interceptions that year. How many fantasy points would he have had? I mean, that just screams what his upside is. And even though he was conservative with the Saints this past season, I looked at quarterback upside, like I mentioned earlier. 2 of his 7 games, so small sample size this past season, he had 3+ touchdowns, which is one of the categories for upside. That was 28.57% of his games, 14 touchdowns in 7 games. So small sample size, but we know that he can throw touchdowns. And then if he is unleashed a little bit and he can have a higher passing yards, that's quarterback upside for you. And quarterback 30 would be an absolute steal if he literally lands anywhere.
Yeah. All right. We're going to move on to the running backs here. And why don't you go ahead and go first here, and we'll kind of alternate.
So this is so I got 2 guys that come to mind. I'll go through my first one, and then we'll go back and forth here. But it's risky because I feel like there's the chance that somebody else is brought in. And the reason I say that is because we got punked this week and somebody else was brought in, and then that guy went back and was like, nah, I'm not going. But
yeah,
I think it's Devin Singletary, because in the event that he is the lead back, we saw what his value was with the touches he was getting, because before he was the guy in week 14, he had 8 games under 50% of the snaps. So not super relevant. But when he was the guy, weeks 14 through 17 for fantasy, he ranged from 68 to 93% of the snaps, and he was the running back 3 overall. He averaged 18.3 fantasy points. Then in the postseason, he had 107 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and 7 catches in 2 games for Buffalo. So they highly trusted Devin Singletary from weeks 14 through the end of their season. he looked really good. And we've seen Devin Singletary before where like he looks good, then he looks bad, and then we don't really know what to expect. But he was pretty consistent. So in my opinion, Buffalo, they just got rid of Cole Beasley. Gabe Davis maybe is one of their options. They need an elite second option for Josh Allen. I truly believe that, because I feel like if they want to compete, they got to pair Stephon Diggs with somebody else that's going to draw attention. And I know they brought in OJ Howard with Dawson Knox, whatever. But Devin Singletary, if he is the guy, high value. Right now, what does he cost you? I don't, I can bring up keep trade cut or
I
whatever.
think he's
You got it.
In super flex dynasty. That's kind of how I just rate everything. But he's going in the 9th round.
Ninth round.
So that's 2 rounds behind Leonard Fournette. Kind of 1 round behind AJ Dillon. So
Interesting.
he's back there, but people have started to notice him a little.
Yeah. In Fantasy Pros, the last time I checked, because I did my own dynasty rankings, and sometimes I'll peek at theirs and see where they got guys. I'm pretty sure he was outside the top 24. I could be wrong on that, but if he is outside the top 24 and he's a starter, to say that he can't be a running back too, I don't know. I think he can be, because we saw it. But it's polarizing to me. As long as they don't bring in anybody that's going to take everything, then I think he can have some decent value.
See, that part of that is my fear with Devin Singletary. They did try to sign J.D. McKissick, and while J.D. McKissick isn't a world burner, he's not an incredible talent. But it screams to me that they don't feel 100% confident in Devin Singletary. So if they have the right guy fall to them in the draft, they might take him. But that's just part of this whole game of dynasty. You have to sometimes take those risks. You have to have those risks baked in. And I think that risk is baked into his value right now. And so if that doesn't happen, then he'll rise up in ADP. But if that does happen, then he'll shoot down. And so it's just the volatility with that, projecting whether the Bills sign another running back or not.
And I think just to wrap up a thought on Singletary, I think, McKissick, if he would have came in, he would have capped Singletary's receiving ceiling, right? And, I think that's better than if they tried to bring in like Leonard Fournette or Melvin Gordon, because then that's like a workhorse back. So like that's the optimism I have. Never been a Singletary guy, but I see the opportunity, I guess, and that's big for dynasty, for redraft, as well as just like seeing a potential opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of how I feel with my first sleeper running back here. My running back here is Chase Edmonds. They signed Raheem Mostert, and a lot of people are overreacting. Raheem Mostert is a 30-year-old running back who's never had over 200 touches in a season, and he has a lot of trouble staying healthy. And so I don't think you should overreact. People are like, oh, Chase Edmonds is now strictly a third down back. I really don't think that's the case. I think Chase Edmonds is going to hit around 13 to 15 touches a game when Mostert is healthy, and they're going to run the ball a lot in that San Fran system. And so I think Chase Edmonds is going to have that elite receiving upside. I mean, he played 12 games last year and had over 40 receptions. And so he does provide an elite floor when it comes to receiving value. And then if they use him a lot in that rushing role, whether it's 10 to 12 carries a game, that's kind of what I project. It'll still be super fantasy relevant. And as I said, Raheem Mostert has just had problems staying on the field. He's 30 years old, and most running backs hit a hill at 28, but Mostert hasn't been on the field the last 2 years, so we haven't even gotten to see if he's hit that hill. And so I think people, I'm buying Chase Edmonds all over, because once the Mostert signing happened, everybody just relegated him to a third down back, and he's going to be a lot more than that this season.
Yeah, I think so too. I think if Mostert's 100% healthy, he will have some sort of role. I think it's just going to cap off, if he is healthy, what people originally thought Chase Edmonds was going to be with the Cardinals before James Conner was there, was like this Alvin Kamara role, where he is pass catching, getting a ton of receptions, but also being the lead back as well. I don't know if he's going to get 20 touches a game or anything like that, but we know what Chase Edmonds is. And you mentioned how many receptions he had in the 12 games. He had 4 games of 5+ receptions. We know that's the way he profiles. Looking at his rushing, he averaged 49.33 rushing yards, but if you take away the one game he got hurt and he only carried the ball once, he averaged 53.54 rushing yards. But, that's which is not the best of signs. But I will say Myles Gaskin was so fantasy relevant. And if we look at like a talent perspective, who would you rather have as your running back that's catching? Would you rather have Myles Gaskin, who, like, hats off to him for what he did? Or would you rather have Chase Edmonds? And me personally, I'm taking Chase Edmonds, right? So
Absolutely.
if Myles Gaskin could find a way to be pretty fantasy relevant, maybe not this season, but the season prior, and now you replace Myles Gaskin with a better Myles Gaskin, who's probably a better runner too, then I can see that. And if people are dipping his value because of Mostert, then I'm with you, and I'd buy too. I've never been a Chase Edmonds guy, but I do see where he can get a ton of receiving work, still run the ball, and I can also see people being out because of Mostert.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that even though he was on pace for just around 50 rushing yards a game, he was over 5 yards a carry.
It's good.
And so if he gets more carries, that yardage is going to go up because last season he had 5.1 yards per carry, and so he definitely has some upside with that. But I think the more work that he'll get, his efficiency in terms of rushing yards may start to drop, just like Kamara's did.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, who's your second guy here?
Second guy, so this goes back with my definition of a sleeper, a guy that's cost right now and value right now might not be to what the production can be in the coming season. Because when I say the name, it's a bigger name, but my perception of Aaron Jones right now from the community is that a lot of people are kind of out on Aaron Jones, because if you look at some people's rankings for Dynasty, people are starting to put A.J. Dillon close or even higher. Some people, I talked to my friend Dave in the space, he had A.J. Dillon higher. People saw that the snap percentages were changing as the season went on for the Packers, even though Aaron Jones was a bit banged up. But I really think that there's a perception that Aaron Jones is getting older and that because A.J. Dillon exists, his value is not that great. But the number one thing that stands out to me is Aaron Rodgers is back. And what does Aaron Rodgers do with Aaron Jones? He throws him the ball a lot.
He's the number one wide receiver right now.
He is right now. Even with Devontae Adams, though, on the team in their playoff game, 9 receptions for 129 receiving yards. He had 41 rushing yards as well. I know A.J. Dillon got hurt, I think, in that game, but he wasn't going to catch 9 passes from Aaron Rodgers. So he had huge games this past season, 4 weeks of over 20 fantasy points. That week 2 game won everybody their matchup. He had 41.5 fantasy points, had a career high of 52 receptions. I did a study of pass catching running backs that hit the 50 catch mark in the past, and the percentage of those guys that finished as top 12 running backs was fairly high year to year. I don't have it in front of me, but again, just because of the perception of Aaron Jones and people not understanding that, sure, A.J. Dillon exists, sure, A.J. Dillon's going to get some work, but Aaron Rodgers is back and he trusts Aaron Jones to catch the ball, and now they have no receivers. Aaron Jones is going to be a steal in drafts if he slips.
Absolutely. I feel like right now he and Melvin Gordon are being seen in a similar light.
Crazy.
And Aaron Jones is 26. Like, he's 2 years younger than him, but they seem to be seen in the same light, and it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I think his value has dipped so much that he's going to be an absolute sleeper right now. All right, my second guy is a little deeper here, but I'm gonna go with Tony Jones. Tony Jones had an injury last year, but when he was on the field and he was getting the touches because they don't give Kamara a full workload, he's just one of the most valuable handcuffs in the game. As long as they don't bring in Mark Ingram again or something like that, he was efficient on touches. He was getting 8 to 10 per game, and so that's there's a flex opportunity with that depending on how deep your league is, and he was really good on the touches that he got. If Alvin Kamara goes down, I believe Tony Jones can take that full workload and do really well with it. We saw Latavius Murray in the past just light it up in that role, and I think Tony Jones can do similar in that same role. And so he's a deep guy, but if you can send a late third round pick for him and get him in Dynasty, I absolutely would.
If he ends up being the other back with Kamara, I think it's a must grab player for redraft if your benches are a bit deeper, because we can dive in and look at his game splits and say, well, week 3 averaged 6 yards per carry, but he only carried the ball 2 times. But then we can go to week 12 and say, he got 16 carries against Buffalo, had a bad game. Other games he showed some spark. Like, we can nitpick the certain things, but I think historically we got to look at the Saints system and say, Latavius Murray, who you said before, when he got touches, he was efficient in that offense because that offense is operated in a certain way that running back should have some efficiency. And Kamara is a guy that gets complimentary, however you say it, complimentary work in that system with Latavius Murray, but also Mark Ingram. Not so many years back, but that's the premise I would have for Tony Jones. Is we've seen this system before where the other guy with Kamara was fantasy relevant at some point. Might as well stash him.
Absolutely. All right, why don't we move on to our wide receivers here? Who is your first sleeper wide receiver?
All right, so this is tough because the last 2 years he's been really banged up, and I feel like if you were to put him on your trade block in your dynasty league, everybody would kind of smirk at it and you wouldn't get much for him. But if this guy's healthy in this coming season and I'm a contender, let's say I'm a contender right now and I think I can win, and I'm looking for that last piece that might push me.
Wait, can I guess?
Yes.
Is it Julio?
It's Julio. It's Julio for me. It's Julio. My thing is he's been injured, which, again, does that come with age and wear and tear through the years? Maybe, but it's not like when he was healthy, he looked like crap. I mean, he looked very good when he was healthy in certain games. Week 2, he had 18.8 fantasy points. He had 128 receiving yards. That doesn't look like a 33-year-old wide receiver to me. And we had to skip ahead because of the injury, but week 18, he started coming back, 5 for 58 and a touchdown. That looks pretty good. And then in the playoffs, 6 catches for 62 yards. So we see Julio, when healthy, he does fine for fantasy. I mean, it's only 2 weeks this past season. Actually, week 18 is outside of the fantasy world, but there's a chance that he ends up with the Bucks. I guess that's the rumor now, that he ends up with Tom Brady. Or what if he ends up, and we're saying a bunch of what ifs, but what if he ends up being that guy, like I mentioned earlier, next to Stephon Diggs in that Bills offense? I think there's a lot of possibilities that he can sign a 1-year deal with a contender, and if he's healthy, be very fantasy relevant. And nobody wants Julio in your fantasy league. I promise you, as right now today. Maybe you or I might, because we look at this stuff way too much. But 2019 wasn't that far ago, but he was the wide receiver 4, and I know he's getting older and he's been hurt, but I'm taking a chance on Julio. If I can throw like a late third or something because people are totally out, then why not take the chance?
Yeah, absolutely. He is definitely worth taking that chance on. He was one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game, and he's still playing the game. And so I think he's definitely worth taking a shot on. And his price tag is so cheap right now. It's definitely worth it. My first sleeper here is Brandon Cooks.
Love Cooks.
Brandon Cooks, I don't understand why he is so underrated. Um, every season he's got 100 targets. He's been a top 20 wide receiver. There's one season in there where he didn't get 100 targets because he had issues with injury getting back on the field. And this guy is going behind Mike Williams, behind Allen Robinson, behind Juju Smith-Schuster, behind Hunter Renfrow, behind Cortland Sutton. And this guy does it every single year. I like to call him Diet Mike Evans because he is Mike Evans, but he doesn't score as many touchdowns. Like if you comp their seasons, besides that one season, Cooks has had 1,000 yards every year. Mike Evans has had 1,000 every year, but Cooks just isn't a red zone beast. But other than that, they're similar players, and they're going five rounds apart, and they're the same age. So I just get flabbergasted with how disrespected Cooks is in the fantasy community because he's a top 20 wide receiver each and every year.
I 100% agree with you. Brandon Cooks has been one of my favorite players for fantasy because every single year, like you're saying, he is underrated. And I think there was this perception in the past that like Robert Woods was so underrated for fantasy and this and that. And Cooks never gets the love that he deserves. My biggest like preseason hit was a board session. So I usually do board sessions in my office. And it was Brandon Cooks. His ADP in this video, I have it in front of me, was wide receiver 39. And I was saying, looking at all of his finishes in the past, 2020, 17, 2018, 13, 2017, 15, 2016, 10, 2015, 13 for the wide receiver finish for fantasy. It was nothing like he's ever done before. So I didn't understand why his draft stock slipped so low. And before the season, he had 1,000 plus yard receiving season. He had 5 seasons of 114 plus targets. So you can count on Brandon Cooks until he is gone or has this big, athleticism dip because he's old or something like that. You can count on him going for over 1,000 receiving yards. You can count on him for getting probably 115 plus targets on a given year. And you can count on him just being a guy that on any given week can score you 20 fantasy points. So I 100% agree with you. And I promise that the sooner we get, or the closer we get to the season, his value is probably not going to change because everybody's going to be worried about, the quarterback situation. And, if he doesn't move, let's say he doesn't move and the Texans are not very good. And, this young guy is going to be a breakout. So I don't really want Brandon Cooks, and he's going to be a value again, like he is every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had him as my wide receiver, like 17 in my rankings in redraft last year. And man, did I get so berated for it. And he finished as the wide receiver 20. And so I love taking him everywhere because he's just a sleeper. He's a perennial sleeper. And I don't think it's ever going to change.
I agree. 100% agree.
All right. Who's your second guy here?
All right. So, another guy that not like this deep league sleeper. I'm just going to throw this out there. We're talking about guys that are going to break out in this coming season potentially. Love Elijah Moore. Probably not a sleeper, so I'm gonna leave him off this list. He just comes to mind every time I think of like an undervalued person. I'm gonna say Marquise Brown, and a lot of people will not like that, but with Lamar Jackson this past season, he looked very good for fantasy. He actually started really hot weeks 1 through 7 before the bye. He was the wide receiver 6 overall. He averaged 18.6 fantasy points. Very good. Following the bye, 9 through 17, he was a wide receiver 31. He averaged like 12 fantasy points. He had 6 games of 19 plus fantasy points, 6 games under 10 fantasy points, 7 games of 10 plus targets. So he finishes the wide receiver 17, but the way, again, how he's perceived, I think is very, very low. And I don't think people understand that, the connection with Lamar Jackson was very evident. And things change when your quarterback that you did the entire season preparation from doesn't play in a bunch of games. And Marquise Brown, when I look at fantasy dynasty rankings and where he's going in startup drafts, goes pretty late for a guy that was a clear wide receiver one when he was with Lamar Jackson. And everybody loves Rashad Bateman and everybody loves Mark Andrews. And I don't blame them. I like both of those guys too. But Marquise Brown was good. And he still gets a lot of hate, I think, from the drops from the year prior and things like that. But because, again, of the perception versus, hey, he was a top 6 wide receiver with Lamar Jackson, I'll take that perceived value dip, and I'll take a chance, even though it's going to be an offense with some question marks because of the different pass catchers.
Yeah, Marquise Brown is a guy that I view in a similar light as Cooks, is that he performs each and every year, and he's gotten better every year.
Yeah,
and people just because he didn't become AJ Brown or Terry McLaurin, and last year he was on pace to be much better than Terry McLaurin, but for some reason the community just does not appreciate him, does not respect him for the output that he's had, and so it's pretty sad. But again, he's a sleeper. He's a guy that I'm gonna target in and out of every draft, because his value does not match to his output.
I'm going to put you on the spot real quick.
Yeah.
Real life question.
Uh-huh.
One quarterback league. Would you in a 12 team dynasty league, would you pay the 112 for Marquise Brown?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No question about it.
All right. Wanted to see because I had this like debate before, and I heard different perspectives, but that's interesting to hear. So I like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are down on this draft class, and I don't love this draft class, but it is pretty deep at wide receiver. But when you're talking about a 1 QB league, let's say the 3 running backs that are considered in the top tier, you've got Burks, London, Wilson, kind of in that top tier of wide receiver. After that, Marquise Brown is better than the other options out there for me. And I would probably take him. I would probably trade the 1.06 for Marquise Brown. And like, I don't have him as high as Akash, because he's obsessed.
I had him on my show talking about Marquise, actually.
Yeah, and so like, I like him, but I don't have him anywhere in the world. But he's just he continues to get better every year, and I do think that he's going to out-target Rashad Bateman. And so right now I'm actually trying to sell Rashad Bateman because I think he is the third fiddle in that rushing attack.
Yeah, I agree.
My second wide receiver buy here, I'm going to skip my second one here and go to my third, but I'm going to go with DJ Chark. I personally think that he's a better talent than Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'll get a lot of flack for that, and that's okay, because Chark, we've seen him perform at an elite level with a bad QB room. A lot of people love Gardner Minshew, but he's not an absolute beast. Nick Foles had his time and has not done anything since. And so with Jared Goff or a rookie QB in the helm, I think that DJ Chark's going to be that veteran they looked to. He's a solid go up and come down with the ball wide receiver. And when your QB isn't super accurate, that's a guy that's going to win those jump balls. And I think he was a great target for the Lions to go get for Jared Goff. And so I think he's going to be undervalued because he's on the Lions, because of what Amon-Ra St. Brown did at the end of last year. Most people are going to dive into his pool and leave Chark for dust. And I think Chark, although he's not going to have an elite season this season, I think that he will be undervalued for sure.
Yeah, I think the injuries to Shark is what brought his value down. I think people have just overanalyzed him missing games before. When in reality, you mentioned it before, he had an elite season. 2019, 14 games played, wide receiver 16 overall, 15.6 average fantasy points with the quarterbacks that you already named. 7 games above that average, 3 games above 100 receiving yards, with 2 of them being 146 and 164 receiving yards. So we've seen him be very good for fantasy in the past. He's a 6'4" receiver, big guy. He can score touchdowns. I agree with you that I feel like his value will be very low this offseason because of everybody's love for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And let's say at the end of the day, both guys are just flex plays, right? Because they both are playing in a system where, Swift catches the ball and TJ Hawkinson catches the ball. What if they bring in another guy? Fine. But let's say they both end up being flex plays. What you pay for Amon-Ra St. Brown versus what you pay for Chark is going to be 2 completely different things, with Chark being the guy that's all the way at the bottom of that list. So I do agree on that. And when you've seen a guy in the past have a solid fantasy season, those are guys you need to buy into, because a bigger level, I'm not comparing the two, but in the past we saw Cooper Kupp have a top 10 fantasy season, and everybody's like, well, we never seen this coming this season. Well, he was a top 10 guy before, just like Leonard Fournette. Like, I'd never seen this coming. He was going to be a top 10 running back. Well, he was before in the past too. So we saw Chark in the past be a top 16 guy. So we know he can do it,
Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite buys right now. Just nobody wants a player on the Lions, and so that enhances. Well, for me, it enhances his value because he's just going to be that much cheaper. All right, let's each do a tight end quick here, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah, sounds good. Cole Kmet was one of my picks before, but again, we've talked about a bunch of Bear stuff. I won't talk about him. I've talked about this other guy in another podcast recently, but Brevin Jordan's a guy that interests me because in a small sample size, he was having a bunch of tight end 1 finishes. So his first snaps were not until week 8, and a lot of people have mentioned, like, well, if he wasn't beating out, Jordan Atkins, then, how is he valuable, this and that. But we know that the timetable for a rookie tight end is usually not like immediately an impact. We've seen it before where some guys are, but some guys take a little bit to develop in a system. But Brevin Jordan, so starting week 8, when he first was getting snaps, he was the tight end 5. Then week 12, he was the tight end 12. Week 14, he was a tight end 6. Week 16, he was the tight end 11. He had 3 touchdowns during that span from week 8 on. So we saw 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of being a top 12 tight end for fantasy. And what does that mean? Was a top 12 tight end for fantasy like 10 points or 20 points on a given week? It ranges because
Right.
That's a very unpredictable position. But on the Texans, you mentioned Brandon Cooks. We know he's that dude for their system if he is still going to be there. Brevin Jordan has an opportunity to be involved this coming season for a team that's building and seeing a bunch of tight end 1 finishes. I'm going to take a late round chance on him having some relevancy in this coming season because, again, I love opportunity and I love involvement in an offense that can somewhat be consistent.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed watching the film of Brevin Jordan. I think he's a solid player, and he could really come out to be the second fiddle in that offense. But I've been in some tight end premium drafts that Brevin Jordan is going in the same tier as Dawson Knox and Dalton Schultz.
Really?
Absolutely. It was like
Dalton Schultz too. Really, I would never expect that.
They were kind of tied together before free agency. Like Schultz would go, and then 5 picks later, Knox would go.
Interesting.
But like where his value is on keep trade cut, I would agree. But if he's going in that same tier as those guys, I just can't get any ownership of him because
no way.
I can't buy him at the price of somebody who's had a top 6 tight end season. and when
No.
we've seen a couple of games from him. And so I'm excited to see what he can do as a prospect. But from what I've seen, people aren't sleeping on him.
Yeah, that's interesting. Fantasy Pros, obviously, they're not drafting
Right.
in leagues. Fantasy Pros Dynasty rankings have him at tight end 21. So, like to that,
absolutely.
That. So, I guess it just depends on your league, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with somebody who just signed today, and I'm going to say that Hayden Hurst is a sleeper. He's a solid receiving tight end who's just never gotten his opportunity. And he signed with the Cincinnati Bengals today. CJ Uzama was on the field a lot, got quite a few targets, quite a few looks, and I think that Hayden Hurst is a better tight end. And so while he's not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a top 12 tight end in that offense. There's just T. Higgins, you've got Jamar Chase, you've got Joe Mixon. And I don't know that he might out receive Joe Mixon, but I think he's an underrated asset. And I actually tried to see if he was available in free agency in all my dynasty leagues once I saw that he had signed, and he'll be the first tight end on the roster there. So I've always liked him as kind of a sleeper guy, somebody who has untapped potential, but he was behind Mark Andrews, and then he was going to have an opportunity, and then Kyle Pitts comes in, and so hopefully that the Cincinnati Bengals don't draft Trey McBride and crush all my dreams, but yeah, I would love to see Hayden Hurst do something really nice this season.
Yeah, the 2020 wasn't bad, actually. 2020, he had most of the season above 60% of the snaps, and he had a bunch of weeks kind of in the teens, it looks like, or somewhere between like 10 and 15-ish fantasy points. So even if somehow he has those weeks with the Bengals, he's that guy that's, open in the middle of the field because you got Higgins and Chase and Boyd drawing all the attention, and he finds weeks where he scores 13 fantasy points. That's still useful for the position if you think about it, because a lot of guys on a weekly basis are scoring under 10 fantasy points. So opportunity is there. Will the Bengals get a Trey McBride or something like that? I mean, before we've seen them pass on a major team need and go and grab somebody. But I think, again, opportunity is key, and he's got a decent one there with the Bengals.
All right. I think that's gonna wrap us up here, but I want to know where we can find you, Nick.
Sure. You can find me at P2W Fantasy on Twitter. That's with the number 2. All my content is on Twitter. I'm also on TikTok, and I have a podcast as well. I do a bunch of random stuff throughout the week. In all honesty, I'll drop live streams, my podcast. I'll have guests on, written content, short videos, just a big mix of everything. I do stuff for fantasy points. Just trying to stay active in this community. And what I don't get to do enough is guest on podcasts. So I'm really thankful you had me on here today. This was a fun one, and it's good talking football with new people face to face all the time. So appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to have you on, and someday we'll get you back here again, and we can talk about how the Bears made the playoffs in 2 years and won
the Super Bowl. Yeah,
absolutely.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you again, Nick.